Is adding depth at cornerback a bigger concern than adding a proven starter opposite of Brian Burns at outside linebacker? I'll tell you right here on Locked On Panthers.
You are Locked On Panthers, your daily Carolina Panthers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, as always, Julian Council, talking Carolina Panthers with you every Wednesday. Welcome into another edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, as always, Julian Council, talking Carolina Panthers with you every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday as we continue on into off-season mode here on the show. But don't worry, starting on July 17th, we'll be back to your team every day. Our motto here on the Locked On Podcast Network, as the Carolina Panthers officially announced that they'll be starting off training camp down in Spartanburg, South Carolina, once again on the campus of Wofford College on Wednesday, July 26th. So a full week of shows get you ready for training camp starting on July 17th. Subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And be sure to follow me, Julian Council, on Twitter at Julian Council, where on Fridays like today, I answer your weekly Friday mailbag questions, either at me or DM me if you'd like to participate in next week's edition of the Weekly Friday Mailbag. Today's episode is brought to you by Birddogs. Go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNFL, and they'll throw in a free custom Birddogs Yeti-style tumbler with every single order. Back again for another edition of the Weekly Friday Mailbag here on Locked On Panthers. A light load, but some good questions to think about and to talk about here on the show. Let's go ahead and start off with Jonathan, who has a question about what is the bigger concern on defense. He says, I feel as if a lot of fans expect / want the team to trade for an elite / proven edge rusher opposite of Brian Burns. Yes, like you and everyone else who knows this team knows, that's a priority need outside linebacker. But I honestly feel better about that huge blank on the other side opposed to the depth at cornerback. Also, not a fan of wanting to jump the gun and spend unnecessary money / picks when we have a brand new staff of an elite DC who could potentially put Marquis Haynes, Etor Gross-Matos, / DJ Johnson, and we'll throw in Amari Barno as well, in positions they can succeed. And if they don't work out, what have we lost besides maybe reaching a little in the third round for Johnson? LOL. In conclusion, keep what we got defensively, or if we're going to spend money / picks, go for a proven starter at corner. So really what Jonathan's saying is he feels like the bigger concern is at cornerback as far as the depth goes there than it is at edge rusher as far as who is going to start. Now, you're talking about backups compared to starters. Now, you did bring up if they can bring in a proven starter at corner. The problem is the proven starters at corner are not on the market here on June 16th. Now, there surprisingly have been proven starters at outside linebacker on the market for a while now. When you look at Leonard Floyd, of course, signing in Buffalo, he's someone who's played in this scheme. That would have made a lot of sense, but the Panthers did not bring him on, whether they were interested or not. He's now with the Buffalo Bills. Frank Clark, maybe not as much of a scheme fit, but he's someone who's now signed in Denver. We're looking out where there's players like Yannick Ngakoue who has familiarity with Frank Reich. He's still available. Just change agents, and he would make sense for the Carolina Panthers. The only problem with Yannick Ngakoue is he has no interest in playing run defense. So do you want to give him the kind of money that he's wanting if he's not going to give you that effort outside of rushing the passer? Probably not. And that's why he's available here on June 16th. Melvin Ingram's available. Justin Houston's available. Two guys that have played in the 3-4 scheme. And, of course, Jadeveon Clowney. He is also available for the Carolina Panthers to go out there and get a proven starter. Now, some of the proven starters, they have weaknesses. Like Ngakoue, his weakness is effort and wanting to be able to stop the run. Clowney, his weakness is actually making plays. Let's be honest. And then Ingram and Houston's weaknesses are, well, they're getting older. So there's only so many options out there available for the Carolina Panthers. Now, the good thing is they do have younger players like Gross Matos entering into a big time year from year 4, new staff, new scheme. Does he fit? Brian Bird said some pretty glowing things about Gross Matos really learning how to kind of recognize what to do when dropping back in coverage, something he was never asked to do in the previous 4-3 scheme here in Carolina. We'll talk more about the differences of those two schemes later on here on the show. Got DJ Johnson, who the Panthers moved up from 93 to 80 to bring in. He's more of a project, but he's going to be 25 this year. So you're going to need to see something out of him sooner rather than later. And then, of course, Mari Barno, who they drafted a year ago, and Marquis Haynes, still younger guy, but he's been in the league for 5 seasons now and heading into year 6. You have options there. At corner, you don't have a ton of options when it comes down to at least proven options. We know that CJ Henderson's going to not start, but he'll come in and be able to play at outside corner. Same thing with Keith Taylor. When I look at cornerback, they haven't really addressed the outside corner position this year. They have addressed kind of the nickel position. Looking this new scheme, you can see Jeremy Chin play that big nickel. You could see Jamie Robinson play that. Eric Rowe could play that as well. They've gone out there and they brought in some options at nickel. But as far as outside corners, they haven't really done that. And Donte Jackson did speak pretty highly of Stan Thomas Oliver, who's also entering into his 4th season, has been known more of a special teams ace and why he's been able to make the roster after being a 7th-round pick out of FIU back in 2020 in that first draft class of Matt Rule. He's been solid for them special teams wise, but if he can turn himself into a player on the outside, that would be great as well. Like, that's the real concern at corner. It's depth on the outside. We know that Jaycee, when healthy, is fantastic. The problem is he's had some unfortunate injuries and he's going through one right now. Donte Jackson, when he's been healthy, he's been a solid player for the Panthers. The problem is he really has not been healthy the last 3 seasons, and now he's recovering from the most significant injury he's suffered so far with that torn Achilles, although he says he'll be ready for training camp. If something happens to those guys, we've seen what happens. CJ Henderson has just not been reliable. Now, the hope is with this elite DC and this new coaching staff that he can be a better player. And that the fact that it's a contract year, does he step up? We'll see. Keith Taylor, lesser expectations after being a 5th-round pick, but he does have that size and length that you're looking for. Maybe he develops into a guy that you can depend on in the future because you're certainly going to need him after CJ Henderson likely departs after this season. So looking at those 4 and in Stan Thomas Oliver, you're good with the top 2 guys if they stay healthy, but the other guys, we haven't seen a lot of STO. We've seen enough out of Keith Taylor and CJ Henderson to know that right now they're not reliable. I just don't know who out there is going to come in and make you feel better about that. At nickel, you got options, so you can feel good about that. But at outside corner, like, that's where the real concern lies. Now, at outside linebacker, because there have been guys out there who are available, who have produced more than the guys on the roster, that's why there's been an appetite for people to bring in another outside linebacker. And Scott Fitterer has mentioned it many times here. The Panthers general manager, Scott Fitterer, has mentioned it many times that, you can always look for an edge. And they did bring one in via the draft. But again, I don't think the expectations are very high for DJ Johnson to come in here and be a difference maker for the Carolina Panthers his rookie year, especially when he's still transitioning and learning the position of being an edge rusher and now having to do it at the highest level of the game. Now, when I look at a guy on the roster, Marquis Haynes really made a lot of noise this past week during mandatory minicamp, and it would be great if he can make that jump. And I've been talking about, there's rarely been times where a guy has gone from not really producing at all to all of a sudden just exploding and becoming one of those top tier pass rushers, or really just becoming a really solid edge rusher. The one guy I can think about who recently did that was Shaq Barrett. Going back and looking at his first 4 years as a Denver Bronco, this is what Shaq Barrett did. Rookie year, 5.5 sacks. The next year, 1.5 sacks. The next year, 4 sacks. The next year, 3 sacks. Look at Marquis Haynes. First 5 years. Rookie year, goose egg. Next year, 1 sack. 4 sacks, 3 sacks, 5 sacks last year as a career high. So first 5 years for Marquis Haynes, he had 13 total sacks and 15 tackles for loss. First 4 years for Shaq Barrett, he had 14 sacks. So in a way, similar. If you want to throw out the rookie year Marquis Haynes, you really can't in this situation. But looking at those first couple years for Barrett and Haynes, they're kind of similar. Now, here's the problem, though. Once Barrett moved to a different team, and you can also, I would say, probably a different coaching staff, different team, he went from 3 sacks to 19.5 sacks. He burst onto the scene and surpassed his career total at that point in one season, getting 19.5 sacks. So he came back to more of what you probably would expect from Shaq Barrett moving forward, where he had 8 sacks the next year, 10 sacks following year. And then last year, dealing with some injuries, had 3 sacks, but 40.5 sacks as a Tampa Bay Buccaneer. Can Marquis Haynes go from 5 sacks to 8 or to 9? Like I said the other day, if he can get 8.5, you take that and you're happy with it if he's going to be the starter at outside linebacker. And that's really what you're asking out of Floyd, out of Ngakoue, out of any of the guys that you would assign. You're hoping that they can get 8.5 sacks. If Marquis Haynes can go from 5 to 8 or hell to 10, I think you've got to be very excited about that in the development of a player like Marquis Haynes. But the problem is, like I mentioned with Barrett, his first 4 seasons, you saw what he did. He was pretty much, what Marquis Haynes had been his first 5. But in year 5, he exploded. Year 5, Marquis Haynes' explosion was 5 sacks. Different scheme. Is that who he is? I don't know. But there's a lot so far that shows you that maybe Marquis Haynes is really just a guy you can depend on and get you about 4 or 5 sacks a season. And then you got to find an actual guy proven who can supplement that, or draft somebody who you can develop into that, which is what they maybe are doing with DJ Johnson and Amari Barno. So I'd still think outside linebacker is a bigger concern, but I can see where you're concerned about cornerback, in particular at outside cornerback, where you do have guys who have played in backup roles and have gotten a lot more snaps than the guys who right now are competing at outside linebacker. Like, that's my concern, really. It's like those guys are pretty green outside of Haynes, have not played that much football, whereas the guys who are backup at outside corner, they've had to play a lot of football because of the injuries that we've seen from guys like Stephon Gilmore, Jaycee Horn, and Donte Jackson over the last couple seasons here in Carolina. So I hear what you're saying, Jonathan, and I don't necessarily disagree, but it is something to monitor as Carolina Panthers are going to take a little time here to kind of catch their breath, and maybe they'll look at some of the guys available and see if they want to bring someone in heading into training camp. By the way, again, down at Wofford College. So hope to see it down there. What else does the roster look like, especially with corners? Who will be here in a couple of seasons? We'll look into the crystal ball here in just a moment on Locked On Panthers. And right now, y'all, just let me be honest with you. There's just no doubt that Birddogs, they make you look absolutely outstanding. I love these things. Been wearing them to the gym, been wearing them all the time. They are fantastic, and you need to get yourself a pair. Birddogs stretch khaki shorts are designed to fit slimmer through the thigh and leg, giving you a truly sculpted look. Birddog shorts are the exact same thing as Lululemon, but they fit way better. Trust me, I would know. They fit way better than regular shorts that are made of a stiff, restricting cotton. Birddogs fixed this issue by inventing cloud knit fabric that looks just like khaki but stretches so they get you a way slimmer fit without having to sacrifice movement. Birddogs uses anti-stink, sweat-wicking fabric that keeps you dry and cool all day long. Y'all, you got to get yourself a pair. Wear them to the gym, wear them when I'm traveling. I got the joggers, I got the shorts, I got every single one of these things, and I love them so much. And go to birddogs.com right now and go birddogs.com/LockedOnNFL and get yourself one of these, a free Yeti-style tumbler with your order. That's birddogs.com/LockedOnNFL for a free Yeti-style tumbler. You don't want to take your Birddogs off. I promise you that. That's exactly how you're going to feel when you get them on. You're going to want to wear these all the time. birddogs.com/LockedOnNFL. All right, let's get back into it. The weekly Friday mailbag here on Locked On Panthers. Over to Alex, who asked, looking into your crystal ball 2 years in the future. So we're looking at 2025. Are any of the cornerbacks that are currently on the roster still on the roster? So is Donte Jackson on the roster? Is CJ Henderson on the roster? Jaycee Horn, Keith Taylor, Stan Thomas Oliver? Are any of those guys on the roster in 2 years' time? Well, looking at their contracts, I think Donte Jackson would have his contract expire at some point there. And then we're looking at, I think the Panthers can get out of it after next season. And if he's injured again, they certainly would do that. Jaycee Horn is heading into year 3, and then he'll have year 4 next season. And the Panthers have to decide next May whether they want to exercise that 5th-year option or not. He's going to have to be healthy, because if he's not, like with Donte, they'll have to make a decision where, okay, we're not going to secure your future with the team. And then Keith Taylor, next year will also be his 4th year, so possibly his last year in Carolina. And then this year, it feels like his last year for CJ Henderson, and could be the same for Stan Thomas Oliver. So you could see all 5 of those guys how they could potentially not be here in Carolina come the 2025 season. Now, for me, I believe Jaycee Horn will still be here. I do. The rest, I have a hard time seeing that. Even if Donte plays well, I just feel like the injury history and concerns are just they're gonna hold him back. And it's not like he necessarily fits the mold of a lot of the corners that they've brought in. That's why I was kind of surprised that they, in a way, did re-sign him after struggling with injuries in 2020 and 2021. Now Fitter was only here in 21 as the general manager, but I was kind of surprised in a way that they brought him back. I thought it made sense. And we had a conversation here early on the show that it was either going to be Donte or Robbie. Turned out both of those guys were able to get paid in Carolina, and one of them is no longer here. I like Donte Jackson. It was really good to see how happy he was, how excited he is about the new coaching staff and the upcoming season. I want the guy to be healthy. I've seen so much recently where it's just like, man, how does he bounce back from that Achilles? And is he able to be the same player and have that kind of speed? Or does it take until 2024 for him to get back to being that, which that could be the reality of the situation, just knowing how Achilles injuries have gone in the past for athletes of all kinds of sports. And just thinking, especially at a position like that, where you have to have that speed and you have to be physical and having to deal with those wide receivers, man, it's going to be difficult for him. And I hope he's able to bounce back and be fine. I just don't know. If he does not have one of those great seasons, it would make sense for the Carolina Panthers just to move on after the season, because I could see this being the last year for Donte Jackson. Jaycee Horn, I think he'll stick around. He's a good player. We know that. We know he's a fantastic player when he's healthy. Just got to stay healthy. If he's healthy this year, they exercise that 5th-year option, and he's here through 2025. CJ Henderson, I've seen enough to where I just don't see it happening for him. Maybe I just don't see it. Stan Thomas Oliver, it's possible that he sticks around. Really, I would probably give him the second best odds to stay because of how good of a special teams player he is. And if he is developing into a solid option at outside cornerback, even though he, again, like kind of Donte, doesn't necessarily fit the mold of the guys that Fitterer, that Seattle archetype that they like, I could see him staying here to continue being a special teams guy, because you really need those. And if this is where his opportunity is and he's happy in Carolina and Chris Tabor wants him, then you keep him around. So really, Jaycee and Stan Thomas Oliver, the guys I see that could stay around. Now, Keith Taylor, he was a late round pick. I don't really feel like you should be all that hard on him based on the last couple of years in the situations he's had been put in late in the seasons. Like, he was bad against Pittsburgh, wasn't a great against Tampa either, and then he got benched going into the New Orleans game, which still is just mind-boggling that Wilkes would do that, knowing that Josh Norman was never going to play a football game again after that. But I guess that's why he did it. It's a nice send-off for Jano, so I guess good for him. But also, it's like, man, dude, development-wise, got to get Keith Taylor back out there. Yeah, he struggled, but you keep playing the guy because he's going to be on the roster at least for the next 2 seasons, probably. So we'll see. I mean, I feel like you can be a lot harsher on Henderson, especially when the Panthers traded for him and he was a top 10 pick, and he has not shown that yet. Or Taylor's a guy who was drafted in the 5th round, and you would think that, okay, yeah, first couple of years, you're probably going to maybe struggle a little bit if you're a backup. And then maybe this year he has to come in and you would expect him to play a lot better and possibly show you. There was the guys I was going to say would be back, like just ranking the 5. Jaycee would be first, then Stan Thomas Oliver, just because, hey, special teams. Then I would put Donte there next. Then I would probably put Keith Taylor, then CJ Henderson. That's just the 5 when I'm looking at it, that I think in that order, like how they would return. But I feel good about Jaycee Horn being here, and I would bet on Stan Thomas Oliver also being here if I had to bet on 2. Those would be the top 2 I'd bet on still being here on the roster in 2 years' time. All right, over to George, who has a question about running backs. As the Carolina Panthers, they seem to be set, but they have not gone out there and added a bruising type of running back. He asked, would there be any interest in signing James Robinson, who the Patriots just dropped to complement Sanders as a more bruiser goal line back? His contract was only 2 years for $4 million, I think, and it seems like Panthers cap space could afford a luxury contract to surround Bryce Young with the best backfield. I honestly feel like they're good, man. And listening to Frank Reich, and Frank Reich let it slip the other day because he didn't really want to name names. He didn't want to say who was looking good, who might have surprised him. He did bring up the fact that Jonathan Mingo looking good, which could be not great for Darius Marshall, but it's also good for the organization, of course. And then he also mentioned Raheem Blackshear, who's someone we were looking at as more of a return guy, Can he add that speed as a running back for the Carolina Panthers? Started his career at Kansas, went to Virginia Tech, was really good there with the Hokies during that pandemic season. Or maybe was it 21, whatever it was. But either way, is he someone that can really step up for the Panthers? Now, he's not going to be a bruiser, but he does add something out of the backfield as a pass catcher. And when you already have Chuba going into year 3, and you've seen what Chuba can do, fine player, especially as a backup running back. And Miles Sanders is likely your workhorse. And most of the times now you have those two guys, like we saw last year when it was Foreman and Hubbard. But it really feels like that right now, that lead back is Sanders, and wouldn't be surprising to see the guy get 20 carries, and then we'll see what everyone else gets. But I don't know if they're looking for that. And Miles Sanders, pretty thick dude, man. So maybe they don't need that goal line guy. And maybe they're in the offensive line's good too. So maybe they're not all that concerned about trying to find one of those goal line bruising backs, that they are good with Sanders. They're good with Blackshear. They're good with Hubbard. And just James Robinson, I just don't know what he's really going to provide that the Panthers don't really have. And I just don't look at him as kind of like that goal line bruiser guy. Like, he got traded. The Jets traded for him after Jacksonville kind of was done with him. And then the fact that he's not even stuck around New England, I don't know what the deal is there with that. I feel like the Panthers are probably good with what they have right now. So yeah, I don't think that there's much interest, and they certainly have not talked about adding a running back at all during the offseason after they brought in Miles Sanders and stuck with some of the guys that were holdovers from the previous regime. All right, take a quick pause. We'll come back here and answer another question here on the Weekly Friday Mailbag. Be right back here on Locked On Panthers. So the Carolina Panthers are going through a scheme change defensively, and that has led to a lot of questions about how it's going to look here with the Jero Avero, the new DC, and how some players are going to fit in and having to bring in some new players. So let's talk about that. As Van from Texas had a question about the 4-3, but really how the 3-4 and how the 3-4 looks compared to the 4-3. He said, unfamiliar in the prototypical roles of the 4-3 front 7, like traits you want in each position. I have no clue on 3-4 prototypical position traits and roles. Could you explain what traits are needed for each position and the change in responsibilities from our old 4-3? Which Panther in the new front 7 do you see as being the most natural fit for the transition? Okay, yeah, good question, because that is something that plenty of people have asked about and have wondered as we're looking at it, because I bring up 3-4, bring up 4-3. Quite simply, it's pretty simple in terms of this. Like 4-3, you got 4 down linemen on the line of scrimmage, or 3-4, you got 3. And then you got 3 linebackers in a 4-3, you got 4 linebackers in a 3-4. Now, as far as the defensive linemen go, you want to have bigger bodies. You always want to have big bodies. We want to have bigger bodies when you're at a 3-4, because you're going to have only 3 down linemen, whereas you have 4, so where you can kind of supplement it with the gap schemes and be able to have 4 guys down there instead of only having 3. So typically, you really want that nose tackle, that interior guy, to be a big-time run stuffer, someone who can stop the run, who can also potentially attack from the interior. Derek Brown can fit into that role. He can also fit into the role playing a little bit of defensive end, because you're going to have a defensive end, a nose tackle, or a nose guard, however you want to call it, and then you're going to have another defensive end on the other side. Those defensive ends, one of them can be used as a guy who can rush, but for the most part, you're not really going to ask him to do that all that much. So when you're looking at it, you're going to have a guy like Henry Anderson who can play defensive end and be seen as someone who's going to be more of a run stopper on the outside and can set the edge. You're going to look at a guy like Shai Tuttle who could play the interior, but also could potentially play another defensive end spot. I would say if Brown's on the defensive end, then you're going to have Tuttle there as your nose tackle, kind of holding the rush and being able to kind of, disrupt from the interior. And it allows you flexibility. That's really the thing about the 3-4 instead of the 4-3, because 4-3, when you got your 4 down linemen, you're kind of set in what those roles are going to be, but you can maneuver guys way more, especially in that odd man front with the 3-4 than you would with a 4-3. Like Derek Brown can play multiple roles. Now, guys like Marco McCall and Bravion Roy, like their role is going to be set as they're just going to be one of those like nose tackles, and you can move guys around more so than you can with a 4-3, which is the good thing about this, especially if it's early downs. You might want to have Derek Brown in there in the interior, or if it's like a pass rushing down, hey, they've talked about it. Todd Wash says, hey, let's kind of move him outside a little bit and figure out if we can get him to be more of an edge rusher in terms of how this is going to be set up. So that's a good thing. Now, as far as the linebacker roles, instead of having that 4th down lineman on the edge, you're going to have a stand-up outside linebacker. So that's Brian Burns. Instead of Brian Burns kind of having his hand in the dirt, he's going to be someone who's going to be standing up, which can be great as far as going out there and rushing from that position, or he could drop back in coverage. Like, there's more coverage responsibilities for guys in a 3-4 at linebacker than there would be for them. I mean, at 4-3, like 4-3, yes, there's still coverage responsibilities, but oftentimes you would probably only want to have 2 linebackers on the field anyways in modern football with the amount of passing there is. So when you're looking at it in those nickel packages where you have 5 corners, like, you're going to bring in someone like Jeremy Chin to replace that other linebacker. Same case where you might have Jimmy Robinson. Like, that's the kind of things that they've done the last couple of seasons where you would see Shaq will be the lone linebacker on the field at times, or that they would have just Shaq and Frankie Louvu. Like, they don't want to have too many linebackers out there. Now, when you look at the linebackers now with the 3-4, you're going to have to ask one of these guys, especially, to be able to get back in coverage and to be able to do that. And Burns, we know he can do it. And the interior guys, like, they're going to pretty much have the same roles of where they're going to kind of set up the alignment. They're going to go in there and just stop the run like Shaq. They're still kind of going out there, head hunting in the middle. And then they also got to have their coverage responsibilities. And then the fourth guy you could get rid of and then throw Chin in there, or Robinson, or someone else to play nickel. Or you could use them as another edge rusher. This is what we talked about, where you have the flexibility to where you can try and use Derek Brown as an edge rusher in certain situations. You want to kick him out to more defensive end position in that odd man front. And then you can have Burns as well out there as an edge rusher, or you could then have someone on the other side in certain situations. It just provides you more flexibility defensively where the roles can change. Like, you, for the most part, know what you want those guys to be able to do, but roles wise, they can change play after play and depending on the situation. So that's really what it allows teams to do, is just have more flexibility and be able to find more ways to utilize some of these guys on their defensive front. So that's kind of just how it looks like compared to a 4-3, where it's a little bit more static in terms of like what you're able to do. And it might be more beneficial where, hey, 4-3, you got 4 down linemen, getting pressure with 4 is really what you want to be able to do. Where now with the 3-4, you can be more creative in your blitzing schemes and where that blitz is going to come from, because you're kind of wondering, okay, like, what's this guy at defensive end, down lineman going to be able to do? The outside linebacker, is he going to rush? Is that other guy going to rush, or is he going to drop back in coverage? You're having more questions and putting the offense more in conflict of what exactly is going to happen in this defense than you would with a 4-3. So I think that's why a lot of people are excited about what it's going to do. And, you know, it's possibly been one of the more popular defenses over the last couple of years, where it still has a lot of 4-3 principles, but overall just allows defenses to do a little bit more and be able to utilize their players in different ways. All right, that's going to wrap up this edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, as always, Julian Council. Subscribe or follow for free, y'all, on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And again, make sure to follow me, Julian Council, on Twitter at Julian Council, where on Friday of next week, I'll be back again to answer your weekly Friday mailbag questions, either at me or DM me over on Twitter at Julian Council. Get those questions in. In the meantime, be safe, be happy, be whole. As always, keep pounding. And I'll talk to you on Monday, where we'll begin our position breakdowns through the end of the month, through the middle of July, until we get back here on the 17th. Going to be breaking down every single position and telling you about some of the top storylines going into it, look at those players and my expectations for them heading into 2023. So starting off with quarterbacks on Monday, Bryce Young, Andy Dalton, Matt Corral. We're going to talk about all those guys coming up here on Locked On Panthers on Monday. So talk to you then.